Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. You took it down. We're glad you're here. Subscribe to this channel. Give this video a like.
Podcast below in the description as well.
All right. The 49ers, not on Russell Wilson's trade list. Taxes. John Lynch said this about Jimmy Garoppolo on the Eye Test for Two podcast when asked, is there any doubt in your mind that Jimmy Garoppolo is your quarterback when you line up in September? His response was immediate. No, he said, not at all. I really believe that. Do you really believe that?
I do not. As people have pointed out on social media channels, he said similar things last year about DeForest Buckner is everything we want in a 49er.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, but I mean, they traded him.
Except expensive.
I judge general managers, coaches. Like listen, I have a life motto. I judge you on actions, not by your words. A lot of people, I'd say in 2021 more than ever, have a bunch of opinions, and then they live their life completely different. And I think in public jobs, you can say you got to say it. I'd argue, don't say anything at all. Like, you didn't have to do this article. Little bit of a PR campaign going on right now, propping Jimmy up, which it does feel like they're making a conscious effort. And they didn't get Stafford. Honestly, it doesn't. Maybe they did a good job. I don't know how active they were in Stafford. I know they were sniffing around. Once Jared Goff got involved, maybe they just knew it wasn't really going to be an option for them. Like, they wanted Jared Goff more than they want Jimmy Garoppolo, whatever, right? So they just realized, like, that's not going to happen. And they when you draft 12 overall, and we just talked about this with the Raiders, and if you get a pick, or Seattle, you trade Russell with picks. Unless you draft really like one, you could argue even two, you don't control that many things in the draft. Like, once upon a time, the Niners traded, as crazy as this was, and at the time you're like, why did the Bears trade from 2 to 3? Or, they jumped up one spot.
Right.
Well, because they were scared that someone else, whether it's true or not, was going to come to 2.
And if somebody was, luckiest day of their life,
unless they were going to do it for like Mahomes or Deshaun.
Prayers.
Yeah. What if it was for Deshaun or
That's
Mahomes,
true.
which probably not.
That's true.
But there was a lot of buzz at the time that teams were going to trade up for Trubisky. Well, who do you think was pushing a lot of that? Probably the Niners a little bit.
Right.
And this is where I think, they often say this is lying season. I do believe that. Just don't say, like, I'll give Belichick credit. He never says shit. So when he does something, it's like, oh, Belichick just traded a guy or signed a guy. You never know. I do think in most teams, and in fairness, like, a big part of John Lynch's job, once the Harbaugh, Chip Kelly, all the Tom Sula debacles happened, they needed someone, and Kyle's great at this too, but John's true role, besides being the GM and being there for Kyle and drafting players, he is a great spokesman for the team, right? Everyone respects him. Everyone likes him.
Face of the franchise.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. That's a great way to put it. And they like him doing this stuff, and he can say the right things. I put little to no stock into anything he says on February 25th. If the draft had happened and they didn't draft a quarterback and he said this, I would 100% believe him. Right? I'd say 90%, depending on.
Wouldn't go 100. Wouldn't go 100.
Who knows what else was out there?
I got no problem that he said a week before Joe Staley retired.
I'm not calling out that one, the DeForest Buckner one.
But I got no problem with him saying DeForest everything we want, because I think it hurt them to trade him. They felt like it's what they had to do. I believe DeForest Buckner's everything they want in a 49er. Doesn't mean you can't trade the guy, which obviously is true. Do you not believe that they meant he's everything they want in a 49er?
I think when you say something like that, you don't get rid of a player, especially when he's that good.
Yeah, or you're preparing people for, we're going to do something that hurts that we don't want to do, but we feel like we got to do it.
And at the time when he said that, I don't even think they probably talked to the Colts at the Combine, right? So, I mean, it might not even have been an option then. You don't even foresee someone trading you the 13th pick for DeForest Buckner. But, like, this is my point. Words don't mean anything.
Well, exactly. So that's what I'm getting at is, like, I don't hold it against him that they said that stuff.
No, I'm not saying he's like a bad guy for saying that.
It's just a
reminder.
reminder.
Him for pick 13 as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's back to
reminder.
Belichick.
Every player has a price. But it's fine because now that like there's Bill and there's everybody else, so Jimmy might have to be their quarterback this year.
But the Steelers, I mean, a lot of teams are a little more mum.
Sure, yeah. But the Niners were in a different place, right? When John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan took over, it was a mess. And part of the job was we got to communicate. Part of the deal is we wanted to communicate with people. We want the community to feel like we're doing the right thing. Like that's part of this job, which is not what Bill's job is, and it's certainly not what Tomlin's job is.
I'd push back. Once you've established you guys are fucking pretty good, it's overrated. You don't need to do any of the shit. Right?
Well, I don't think you ever have to do any of this stuff. You don't have to do it from the beginning.
They
just be good.
Did,
I
at
always
at the beginning they were going to be bad for a couple of years. It was well needed.
But
I think it comes natural to John. I'm not saying he's not good at it. I just think you can get yourself in these sticky situations where people come back.
But I would say back to you, I don't think it matters. Like, if you trade Jimmy, it doesn't matter. So I don't even think it's that sticky for John. Like, John throws the blazer off and sits back at his desk and gets back to work. He doesn't think like, oh, my God, I've backed myself in this Garoppolo corner now.
100%. But like, let's say they trade up to get Justin Fields. They trade Jimmy Garoppolo later that day or the next day. What's like everyone – I think Twitter is irrelevant, but like it's just going to be social media, whatever, Facebook, YouTube. You and I will be talking about it a little bit. I mean, it will get discussed.
Yeah, but
it'll come back.
Why he gets there. Yeah, absolutely. But it's part of why you get paid the money is, hey, there's some things we got to do here, and we got to play Jimmy while we also play the trade market, while we also play the draft, and this is just part of the job. I'm with you. There is a way to go about it like Bill goes about it. But this is who the Niners want to be. They want to have John Lynch out there talking to people, just like the Warriors want Bob Myers out there talking to people. Less this year, but this is just
once you get to a bunch of rings, you can be a little quieter.
That's true. That's true. It doesn't bother me. I get why they do it. I'm with you 100%. And I think now most people have seen this enough, not from the Niners, just in general.
I don't think anyone's holding it against them. My pushback would be...
What I'm saying, though, is I don't think anybody reads that quote and goes, all right, Jimmy's here, everybody.
I agree.
Pack up the trucks.
I think I'd argue it's very, very unfair to have anyone in his job and his role to give quotes in January or February about things that are, hell, even unforeseen to happen in March and April, right? Like, I'm with you. He was not lying about DeForest Buckner. But you say these quotes, then you meet and talk with a lot of things change. It's of all the leagues, it by far has the most turnover and most things change. And a huge part of that is, well, we actually didn't have any cap space. Now we cut 4 people. Now we have the cap space to trade for player X. And maybe that's Jimmy Garoppolo. And who knows? There is not as much unknown, for example, as like in the NBA. Like most rosters are kind of set unless a player demands a trade. A guy's leaving or going. In the NFL, I could give you about 10 hypotheticals right now with the Niners to include different players, and they would be somewhat believable, right? And I'm talking so many Kittle, pieces, Warner, you name it.
Yeah. Nobody.
Like if I told you the Packers, like Aaron's like, I only want to get traded to the Niners, and I'd start throwing out some Kittle, Warner names, it's like, yeah, they'd be on the table immediately.
Well, Deshaun's an example of that. It's been happening, right?
Yeah.
Like if you told Kyle, you can get Deshaun, he's yours, but we have to be able to pick from the whole roster. We have to let us pick 2 players from the whole roster.
Well, who do you think his favorite player is on the team?
Who do I think Kyle's favorite player on the team is?
Yeah.
I mean, Kittle.
I might say Fred Warner.
Oh, but yeah, Fred Warner. I mean, I think you can make the case for any. We've talked about this before that Kyle has this. We think he loves defensive players sometimes more than offensive players.
Yeah. It's probably one of those two. It's like you get to play a little like is Helicopter Dad the right Disneyland dad?
Yeah,
It's like he's not totally with them, but he gets to kind of watch me like, God, these guys are badass. But he doesn't deal with them every day in the meetings where it's like Jimmy or Kittle's driving him nuts.
Well, also I think defensive players, he needs them. He feels like he can scheme up any offensive player. He can't help Fred Warner. He needs Fred Warner.
Yeah, and Bosa.
And Bosa, yeah. You're right. If you said, all right, Kyle, you can have one untouchable player, who do you get to protect? And the Texans can take 2 of anybody else.
I do not think it would be Kittle.
I think he'd protect one of the I think he'd protect Fred Warner. That's a good call, actually. You'd protect Fred over Bosa, I think. Yeah.
It'd be one of those 2 guys, I think. Because he'd have to go, I can get it tight end. But this is the point. Like, you would never go. They would never trade. And this part of this PR campaign, he doesn't have to do that with Kittle, right? He's not going anywhere. Bosa's under contract. I do think the Jimmy thing, there is enough smoke out there with his locker room, the quarterback position. I don't think he'd have to do this with another position. This is a little more sensitive, and I think they're the word I'd use. I think they're overcompensating a little bit for Jimmy because I think a lot of people are shitting on him. And last year it kind of happened. This year it was quadrupled. And I think a lot of it was earned. Like I don't see that much criticism of Jimmy. Like didn't have that coming. And criticism just of like the play, the dependability. Is he good enough? Like can you do this again? Like it's all to me. Everything I read on Jimmy, I don't pretend to be reading every article, but just it all feels very justified right now, right? And I think a lot of the haters last year pumping out their chest a little bit because they were somewhat validated, overrated. I guess the only defense was, well, he's not overrated. He didn't get to play. Well, it's like, well, that's part of Jimmy.
Yeah. Yes, but where it's probably not totally overcompensating is that if he is their quarterback next year, are we going to go through the whole offseason without them trying to defend him at all? Even if we don't think he needs to be defended, which is your point.
One thing he said, I guess, was did he get an exclusive to Barrows? Barrows, good little pickup there. Is that that next year they can't be in a position like this year, and they have to have a dependable backup.
Well, you talking about he did this podcast interview is where the quotes come from. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know who he did the podcast interview with? I just saw Barrows. I just assumed he talked to Barrows.
I Test for Two is the name of the podcast.
That's a good get for the eye test for two. I don't even know who these people are, but
Clark Judge, who I know you've heard of, and Ira Kaufman. They're both NFL writers.
Oh, Ira. He's a Chris Russo weekly in the football season. I like Ira.
These guys. Sorry,
they're Tampa Bay guys. Okay, that makes Ira is. So Ira's probably known John for 25 years. That makes sense. Here's the thing: the moment you say we need to get a dependable backup, that to me is a pretty big red flag. I'd argue that's more telling than him saying anything about Jimmy Garoppolo, because that's basically saying we can't depend on our court. He's telling you everything you need to know, which we already know. So This is the problem. Like these guys have to say stuff for the most part now, unless there's like tension, like the Russell Pete thing. There's tension there. We don't know. But when it's just on the field stuff, I don't think you're going to trick a fan right now or even people around the league. Like, yeah, of course they can't depend on, Jimmy Garoppolo right now. They would be in the backup quarterback market if he's their quarterback. Like that, my mom would have a decent idea of that, let alone other teams in the league, let alone me, you, or anyone listening to this. Correct?
Yeah.
Like I think everything he's saying, like he's just saying pretty normal stuff. Not that, like I said, I don't think words even matter. But he basically is telling you everything we already know. They're stuck with Jimmy right now. Obviously, he's still the only quarterback on the team that is any good, or at least can function, and they need a better backup quarterback if Jimmy is their he didn't say if Jimmy's their quarterback, when Jimmy's their quarterback. But that to me tells you like that's not ideal, because that's not the way good teams talk about their starting quarterback who makes $20+ million.
Yeah, you don't want to pay $7 million for a backup. It's part of what made, I thought, the season that Derek Carr had impressive, in that the Raiders basically gave him a vote of unconfidence by spending a lot of money on Marcus Mariota. And then Derek had a great year. Right?
Yeah. He kind of did the opposite of a Wentz. It's a little different with a second-round pick, but it had some similarities. A guy that had been a high pick, right? I mean, pretty famous guy, and Derek responded really well.
Yeah.
And you could argue that's why Derek, I think, has earned more credit around the league, where Jimmy...
But it's also clear the Raiders should have spent $10 million somewhere else.
Yeah. Derek only missed, 3.5 quarters of a game all year. The difference is the Niners would have been way better off with Mariota, right? At least he might have given them a fighting chance in some of the games. Mm-hmm. Looking back, they should have the $7 million backup, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And now they're in a position where they can't afford to spend $8 million on a backup quarterback.
I'd argue most good teams, unless you have a rookie quarterback, it is not a good business proposition. It's sad to think like this, but it's just a simple reality in football. If you have a top, I'd say 18 quarterback, and he misses a large percentage of the season, your season is over. And then I think John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan would say, yeah, we've had a front row seat to that twice.
Right. And their response would be, I'm glad you don't think it's good business for me to spend $8 million on a backup, but if I don't, and then Jimmy gets hurt again, we're going to be like, well, at least we did good business this year, right? We didn't spend $8 million on a backup. We'd be like, no, how did you not see this coming? Because they're not in total control as to whether or not Jimmy's their quarterback next year. They have to have another quarterback to replace him with. They'd have to have right? Either then you trade or cut Jimmy, but you have to have the other quarterback before.
And I'd argue even if he does stay, they're not in total control if he can just play a lot because as we've seen, he just gets hurt in these weird moments.
It might actually make sense to sign a guy because you know you might need him because you're probably gonna have to do that before the draft anyway. And then if you draft a quarterback, your backups are making $8 million. But whatever, you've got a rookie quarterback on your roster.
You agree, like $7-8 million for them would be a pretty big hit for a backup quarterback when your quarterback makes 22.
Yep, I do wholeheartedly agree.
That would reflect their situation is not ideal. And it's not even it's
the best thing that could happen is that they waste $8 million on a backup in that scenario and the guy never plays.
Yeah. So you could,
we shouldn't have done it in retrospect, but how were we to know?
Yeah. It's where Jimmy does limit their ability because you're right. What are you going to tell the fans? Well, we needed that extra pass rusher. Well, as we've seen, none of it matters when you're starting quarterbacks out. None of it matters.
Here's what makes it awful. You don't get the benefit of having a 22 and 23, $24 million quarterback instead of a $32 million quarterback.
No, because he basically is the same.
Part of the Jimmy contract is like, yeah, but if he's solid, it's value, even though it's expensive, but it's QB value.
You basically have a $31 million quarterback immediately or whatever.
Yeah. So, anyway, John, we understand it. John Lynch, that is.